The cameras were rolling, but the real story wasn't on camera. Behind closed doors at a quiet meeting in Palm Beach, an aging billionaire president was sketching out a desperate plan. The mission? Not to win an election, not to defend his legacy, but to save the dollar. Because if the dollar falls, it's not just America's pride that collapses, it's the entire world's financial engine. And sitting just a few chairs away from Donald Trump was a man you've probably never heard of. Kevin Warsh, the quiet economist who could be holding the keys to America's next great monetary gamble. Why this matters now? The signs have been flashing red for years. The U.S. dollar's dominance, built over decades of wars, oil, and trust, is under quiet siege. BRICS nations are pushing trade in local currencies. China's digital yuan is expanding, and central banks worldwide are buying gold again like it's 1971. Trump knows something most Americans don't, that dollar's supremacy isn't guaranteed. It's engineered, maintained through confidence, clever policy, and sometimes raw intimidation. So, when whispers began that Trump wanted Kevin Warsh back in the fold, Wall Street started paying attention. Because Warsh isn't a campaign face, he's a strategist, a former Fed governor, a man who's been inside the machine that actually runs the money, the Federal Reserve. Who is Kevin Warsh? Warsh's story begins not in politics, but in power. He joined the Federal Reserve during the 2008 financial crisis, standing in the same room where trillion-dollar decisions were made overnight. While the world panicked, Warsh watched the Fed's secret playbook unfold. Quantitative easing, interest rate suppression, emergency liquidity lines to European banks. He saw what it took to keep the dollar alive when confidence was cracking. And he didn't like all of it. Warsh left the Fed with a warning that America was getting addicted to cheap money, that every bailout, every rate cut, every temporary measure was teaching investors one dangerous idea, that the Fed would always print its way out of pain. Now fast forward to 2026, debt touching $35 trillion, inflation cooling but never gone, and Trump facing global competition and a dollar under pressure seems to be reassembling an unofficial shadow Fed around him. The old guards who distrust the system and might be willing to break it to rebuild it. How the system actually works? To see what Trump and Warsh might try, you need to know how money really works in America. Most people think the government controls it, but in reality, the Federal Reserve, a semi-private entity, creates dollars out of thin air. When it buys treasury bonds, it's not using printed cash. It's typing new money into existence, credited to banks that then lend it out. These numbers ripple through the system, raising or lowering the value of the dollar against every other currency on Earth. But here's the twist. The dollar's value doesn't just depend on the Fed. It depends on belief. If global markets stop believing in U.S. discipline, stop believing that the government can manage its debt, the dollar loses its magic. And that, insiders say, is what Trump fears most. The hidden mechanism Warsh's rumored playbook isn't public, but clues are there. He's long criticized the Fed's infinite money policy and argued for a more disciplined, gold-aware system. Some analysts suspect he'd push Trump toward a partial gold-backed digital dollar, something that could restore confidence while locking in control. Others think Warsh might orchestrate an international shock, forcing investors back into U.S. assets by manipulating liquidity or reshaping trade settlements. Sounds extreme? Maybe. But remember, financial wars don't use weapons. They use interest rates, shadow lending, and information. Quick question. If the U.S. really moved toward a hard or gold-linked dollar, would that make America stronger or start a global panic? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're into stories that untangle the secret power plays behind money and politics, subscribe. Because the next episode connects all this to something much bigger brewing in Asia. The irony and tension, The irony here is impossible to ignore. Trump, who once accused the Fed of rigging the dollar, might soon depend on former insiders like Warsh to save it. The same establishment he battled could become his last weapon. And Warsh, the quiet academic who warned about unchecked money printing, may soon be in charge of even more control over the currency system he once distrusted. That's the paradox of power. Every reformer who touches the system risks becoming part of it. Zooming out, the bigger picture. The United States has kept control of global finance for nearly 8 decades through 3 things: oil priced in dollars, trade settled in dollars, and debt bought in dollars. Each of those pillars is wobbling. When Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, when India starts buying oil in rupees, when China sells treasuries quietly in bulk, those aren't small shifts. They're silent votes of no confidence. If Warsh helps Trump craft a new dollar doctrine, it could be America's most radical economic experiment since Nixon ended the gold standard in 1971. Back then, the world adapted. This time, it may not. The unresolved thought? Maybe Trump's plan works. Maybe Warsh finds a way to engineer stability without triggering chaos. Or maybe the dollar's dominance has already passed its peak, and what we're witnessing now is not a rescue, it's a controlled descent. The real question isn't how Trump tries to save the dollar, it's whether the world still wants it saved. And that's the story you'll want to follow, step by step, as it unfolds. Bye. See you soon, guys.